This right here is Shan Haines. Mr. Haines was the CEO of a small bank located in Kansas. Was the CEO, as he's no longer. In fact, he was just sentenced to spend the next 24 years of his life in a federal prison, likely ending his life as a free man and remaining there until his death. But what exactly could cause a bank CEO to receive such a harsh punishment? After all, we've seen the stories of bankers getting away with crazy amounts of negligence or even crimes. The answer to that question is that Mr. Haines was the victim of a scam, and instead of recognizing the scam, taking it in stride and moving on with his life, he instead stole money from everyone around him. A church, his family, his daughter's college fund, and eventually close to $50 million from the customers of the bank he was responsible for. He stole this money because scammers told him that if he did, he would be able to access an immense amount of winnings from his cryptocurrency investments that they held for him. Mr. Haines, the custodian of tens of millions of dollars who operated a financial institution, fell for a scam that is so common in the novice investment world that months before his arrest, the FBI was issuing notices to watch out for it. Haines was the exact person who you would think would be immune to a financial scam, or at least who you would hope was immune to one so easily recognized. Failing all that, you would hope that there were checks and balances in place so the CEO of a bank couldn't transfer out tens of millions of dollars to private accounts at the drop of a hat, but your hope would be completely misplaced, at least in this case. So this is the story of how a banking CEO was scammed by still unidentified criminals, believed he'd won big on a moonshot cryptocurrency investment, but was actually being called a pig, fattened up, and led to the slaughterhouse. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here. Statistically speaking, 1 in 5 people have been the victim of fraud in just the last 2 years alone. That isn't accounting for the rest of their life. You might think you're above it, that you would never fall for one, but that's when you're most vulnerable. After all, you can find stories like this, where notorious scam busters like CoffeeZilla himself fall victim to not reading the small print, where tech channels like Linus Tech Tips lose access to their social media from a fraudulent email, where billionaires from Shark Tank invest in companies that release a fake product. Nobody is immune to being scammed. For normal, everyday people like you or me, it might be a friend who has an investment opportunity or just wanting to borrow some money, a fake text, email or phone call from what you believe is a legit company, a product purchased off a website you've never used before that turns out to be fake, or a person in a video game telling you that they're doubling your money. We are just susceptible to believing a tale, if told well enough and at the right time. And this is especially true where there is the potential of life-changing money involved. That one additional fact can make even the most cynical person fall victim to the most obvious of schemes. Unfortunately for this story, Haines was not the only victim, as he attempted to enrich himself with money that was never real. He stole from everyone around him and ruined the lives of hundreds, but how and why? The answer is what's referred to as shazupan, a Chinese phrase that translates to killing pig plate. It's what we in English refer to as a pig butchering scheme. A weird name at first glance for financial fraud, but incredibly fitting for what happens during the course of this long-term scam. The hallmarks of pig butchering are usually the same. A stranger contacts you, usually on social media or a dating website. Typically, it's an attractive Asian female in the profile pictures. They get close to the victim, dangle the prospect of a relationship, and eventually slip into conversation that they are involved in some form of investment business or opportunity. The targets are often older men due to their access to larger sums of money and their higher likelihood of loneliness or willingness to engage in a new and exciting venture with a young, attractive lady. Usually, of course, there is no attractive young lady involved, but the more advanced schemes can involve one, and they probably have an even higher success rate. The scam begins during this meeting, though the victim has no idea. They just believe they're talking to some woman online who miraculously found them, and despite knowing nothing, are very interested in getting personal. Eventually, the pig will be led to the investment, at which point they will hand over a small sum of money to test the waters of that opportunity. Most likely uninterested in the financial side, but wanting to impress or continue the budding new relationship that has brought excitement back to their life. They will then see insane returns on that investment, multiplication of their initial funds, They will even perhaps be allowed to withdraw that money to show it's real and that everything is just as great as their new friend has told them. No matter whether they are allowed to cash out or not, this is all part of the plan, to show such high returns that the greed becomes overwhelming. The pig will then begin to be fattened up, and you can see where the name of this scam comes from. They're given more and more reasons to invest extra money, more than they can afford. The returns will be mind-blowing, and then that's when the realization hits that they have access to more money than they could afford to lose. They then attempt to pull out their winnings, and this is where things start to go wrong, which is exactly where Mr. Haynes found himself in late 2022. Haynes was at home with his schoolteacher wife and 3 daughters, taking a much needed break from his day job of managing the money of thousands of local business owners, shareholders, and customers. He opened his cryptocurrency account and saw a number that made his heart rate go up. He contacted his new and unidentified friend on WhatsApp and quickly discovered that the funds were suddenly locked, that the only way he could unlock them would be to deposit more money. And this is when all of us would have said the scam was obvious, that we would now walk away, take it on the chin, we played a dangerous game and we lost. But we are not rich bankers with access to other people's money, are we? Mr. Haynes first went to the local church where he often preached. He borrowed $40,000 from this church, fully intending, of course, to pay it back before anybody noticed. But knowing as a local banker that this action is described in the financial world using another word, embezzlement, a federal crime. But despite knowing better, he did it anyway. When this wasn't enough to unlock the funds properly, he went to the local investment club and took another $10,000. Other people's money, which he intended to pay back. But that still wasn't enough, it never is. His own money, the church's money, the investment club's money, where could he go next? His daughter's college fund, $60,000 borrowed from there. He could pay it back, of course, once he unlocked the funds, so it would be okay. No one would ever notice, and when he did pay it back, he was going to give them more money, which was better for them, right? That's likely what he told himself while he was doing it, that he knew better, and that he wasn't doing anything bad. In fact, he was doing everybody a favour. But while this was happening, the investments were growing even larger. Every day, he saw the number increase to amounts beyond comprehension, and he was already so deep in the hole, so desperate to unlock this money, that he, as the pig, was getting fatter and fatter. Haynes started to escalate from tens of thousands of dollars borrowed from other people, numbers that he likely could have paid back if things went badly right now, to a $1 million theft from the Elkhart Financial Corporation. As you would have guessed at this stage, the scammers were very happy that they found someone that was simultaneously successful enough that he had access to vast sums of money, and also so insanely stupid that he didn't recognize the game was being run on him. It's easy to look at this situation and say that we would have all cut our losses long ago, perhaps before becoming a criminal, especially being a finance professional, knowing how to recognize financial crimes that you are currently committing, but also financial scams that you're involved in. But for whatever reason, Haynes didn't recognize or chose to ignore these things. Instead, he went the next step further. He went to the bank where he worked and started to make transfers of bank money to scammers' accounts. First in May 2023, a nervous, shy $5,000 transfer. Then, just 2 weeks later, $1.5 million, followed by another $1.5 million just 24 hours later. At this stage, he's around $4.5 million deep into the scam, a pig so fat that the scammers might have a hard time moving him to the slaughterhouse. He was so deep that at this stage, there would be no coming back. Previously, before stealing from the bank, he could probably have recovered, maybe even done so without being caught, maybe even been considered a victim and forgiven if he was. The moment those transfers from the bank was made, using funds from investors, share and account holders, his life was over and he was to be the villain. Now there would be nothing that could stop him, because the sunk cost was so great that he would go to any length to make it right. Like a degenerate and addicted gambler at the roulette wheel, he might have lost it all, this might be his last $10, but just one lucky streak and he'd be right back, baby. Except, instead of the flashing lights at the casino, it was in his office at the bank, and instead of a roulette wheel, it was his customers' money. That's why the numbers began to increase very quickly. Just 3 days after sending the $3 million, he directed bank employees who he was lying to about the nature of the transfers to send an additional $6.7 million to a cryptocurrency wallet account. Then, just 2 weeks later, he directed employees to send another $10 million, followed closely by $3.3 million. Now, you could say, why were the employees doing this? But he held the ultimate power over them, right? He was circumventing the bank's own restrictions and policies regarding wire transfers and daily limits. Because who's going to tell him no? He's a rich, respected, powerful banker, preaches at the local church, and of course their boss. He testified in courts as a community banking leader, went to conferences for his expertise in the field, and he paid their checks. They were just doing what their boss told them to do. And in doing so, the damage was 11 wire transfers from the bank. The totals and dates you can see on screen right now. From the 17th of May 2023 to the 7th of July, Mr. Haynes directed just over $47 million to be transferred from the bank to the scammers' accounts. What is interesting, as a little bit of additional context, is that on the 5th of July, the same day he sent a transfer of around $8 million, Haynes contacted a friend and asked desperately for help. They met at the bank before it was open, and Haynes immediately asked to borrow $12 million for just the next 10 days, at which point he'd not only pay it back in full, but with an additional $1 million. When the friend asked what the money was for, Haynes pulled out his phone, pretended to log into a cryptocurrency wallet, and showed an account with $40 million inside. I've got this money, and it's in cryptocurrency. I just need $12 million to help verify the funds, he said. Haynes went on to explain that other bankers had been invested in this same way, and that they told him they were making crazy amounts of money. This friend, referred to as Mitchell, told him immediately, "You're involved in a scam, dude. You're in a scam." And if Haynes was thinking clearly, if he wasn't so deep by now, maybe he would have seen how obvious it was. If another wealthy individual, who has no reason to lie, who was also schooled on financial fraud, could point out the scam from a 2-minute conversation, clearly that's what it was. But Haynes was continuing to protest, to virtually beg for the money, to declare that this was real, and he just needed to unlock the funds and everything would be okay. The conversation ended there, and later the same day, Haynes stole that additional $8 million from the bank and transferred it to the scammers, as well as 2 days later, another $4.4 million. Unknown to Haynes, Mitchell was now very suspicious because of Haynes' access to customer funds, worried that Haynes might be using that access to try and pay these scammers to get the money back. He was of course 100% correct, but a little bit too late to do anything about it. He did, however, continue to check his lines of credit at the bank, but it wasn't until he was in the bank one day when it all came clear. A female employee who Mitchell described as stressed told him directly that Haynes had been wiring large sums of money out of the bank. He went immediately to the board members and described what was happening. Within days, they had attorneys involved and Haynes was fired. But as I said, it was too late, the damage was already done. 2 weeks later, on July 28, 2023, the bank was closed by the Kansas office of the State Bank Commissioner and had to be taken over by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, also known as FDIC. In this circumstance, customer funds were safe, as they were FDIC insured. But shareholders of the bank, well, they aren't safe. Some people's retirement funds were entirely wiped out, businesses were wiped out, lives were undoubtedly destroyed. And Haynes still maintained when asked that it wasn't out of control, that if he had just 2 more months, he would have recovered all the money and everything would have been fine. Almost as if he didn't recognize that he'd committed an insane amount of crime, ruined countless lives while chasing money that never existed in the first place. Even after all this, he didn't know he was being scammed, which led to his lawyer during the trial saying this: "He was the pig that was butchered. Mr. Haynes' vulnerability to the pig butcher scheme caused him to make some very bad decisions, for which he's truly sorry for causing damage to the bank and loss to the stockholders. But sorry doesn't change anything, and that brings about the end of his story. Because at this stage, the 53-year-old ex-bank CEO who stole $47 million for an investment that wasn't real for people who contacted him on social media, for which he never saw a single penny, was then sentenced to 24 years in prison. A sentence that will no doubt see him in there for the remainder of his life, or at least whatever good years he has remaining." which is how Mr. Haynes went from being a victim, something that could happen to anybody no matter how smart, accomplished or aware, to a villain who caused harm to countless individuals who trusted him and the banking system. Thanks for watching.